idea, he blurted. Yeah, said Rincewind wearily. Why don't we get Harun to accompany us? Two-Flower looked amazed. How did you know? He said. Harun ceased stuffing silverware into his saddlebags and grinned encouragingly. Then his eyes strayed back to the luggage. If we had him with us, who'd attack us? Said Two-Flower. Rincewind scratched his chin. Harun, he suggested. But we saved his life in the temple. Well, if by attack you mean kill, said Rincewind, I don't think he'd do that. He's not that sort. He'd just rob us and tie us up and leave us for the wolves, I expect. Oh, come on! Look, this is real life, snapped Rincewind. Then the answer hit him. He looked from Harun to the picture box. I've got an idea, he said. I mean, what is it heroes really want? Gold? Said Two-Flower. No, I mean really want. I don't quite understand. Rincewind picked up the picture box. Harun, he said, come over here, will you? The days passed peacefully. True, a small band of bridge trolls tried to ambush them on one occasion, and a party of brigands nearly caught them unawares one night, but unwisely tried to investigate the luggage before slaughtering the sleepers. Harun demanded and got double pay for both occasions. If any harm comes to us, said Rincewind, then there will be no one to operate the magic box. No more pictures of Harun. You understand? Harun nodded, his eyes fixed on the latest picture. It showed Harun striking a heroic pose with one foot on a heap of slain trolls. Me and you and little friend Two-Flowers, we all get on okay, he said. Also, tomorrow maybe we get a better profile, okay? He carefully wrapped the picture in troll skin and stowed it in his saddlebag along with the others. You win, said Fate, pushing the heap of souls across the gaming table. The assembling party relaxed. There will be another game. The lady smiled into two eyes that were like holes in the universe. The lure of the Wyvern. It was called the Wyvernburg, and it rose almost 1/2 of a mile above the Green Valley. A mountain huge, grey, and upside down. At its base was a mere score of yards across. Then it rose through clinging cloud, curving gracefully outward like an upturned trumpet, until it was truncated by a plateau fully 1/4 of a mile across. There was a tiny forest up there, its greenery cascading over the lip. There were buildings. There was even a small river, tumbling over the edge in a waterfall so wind-whipped that it reached the ground as rain. There were also a number of cave mouths a few yards below the plateau. They had a crudely carved regular look about them, so that on this crisp autumn morning the Wyvernburg hung over the clouds like a giant dovecot. This would mean that the doves had a wingspan slightly in excess of 40 yards. I knew it, said Rincewind. We're in a strong magical field. Two-Flower and Harun looked around the little hollow where they'd made their noonday halt. Harun shrugged and went back to oiling his biceps. Looks all right to me, he said. Try tossing a coin, said Rincewind. Harun reached into his pouch and withdrew a Zishaloti leaden quarter iota and balanced it on a purple thumbnail. You call, he said. Heads or... He inspected the obverse with an air of intense concentration. Some sort of fish with legs. Harun grinned and flicked his thumb. The iotum rose, spinning. Edge, said Rincewind. Edge it is, said Harun. So what? Try again, Rincewind suggested. Harun pulled out a fistful of coins. The first two landed in the usual manner, so did the fourth. The third landed on its edge and balanced there. The fifth turned into a small yellow caterpillar and crawled away. The sixth, upon reaching death, vanished. must have been generated here and we're feeling the after effects. Precisely, said the passing bush. Let's get out of here, said Willem. What are they doing now? Asked the old man. The young woman glanced at the scribe glass. Bidding roots and speed, she reported. By the way, you've still got that box on the legs. The old man chuckled. Sappy and held, he said. Remarkable. Yes, I think we'll have that. Please sit with my dear before they go beyond your power, perhaps. Silence, or what the liaison, said the old man. In this dim light, there was something odd about the way he was slumped in the stone chair. You killed me once already, remember? She stood up, tossing back her hair scornfully. It was red, flecked with gold. Erect, Liaisa Wyrmbidder was entirely a magnificent sight. She was also almost naked, except for a couple of mere scraps of the lightest chainmail and riding boots of iridescent dragonhide. Liaisa snorted and strode out of the hall. Her father didn't bother to watch her go. As a wizard, even a dead wizard, his optic nerves had long since become attuned to seeing into levels and dimensions far removed from common reality, and were therefore somewhat inefficient at observing the merely mundane. Besides, since he was now suspended in the narrow space between the living world and the dark shadow world of death, he could survey the whole of causality itself. Liaisa strode down the worn steps that led into the hollow heart of the Wyrmberg, followed by half a dozen riders. Would this be the opportunity? Perhaps here was the key to break the deadlock, the key to the throne of the Wyrmberg. It was rightfully hers, of course, but tradition said that only a man could rule the Wyrmberg. That irked Liaisa. And when she was angry, the power flowed stronger, and the dragons were especially big and ugly. If she had a man, things would be different. Someone who, for preference, was a big, strapping lad, but short on brains. Someone who would do what he was told. The biggest of the three now fleeing the Dragonlands might do. And if it turned out that he wouldn't, well, dragons were always hungry. The stairway passed through a stone arch and ended in a narrow ledge near the roof of the great cavern where the Wyrms roosted. Sunbeams from the myriad entrances around the walls crisscrossed the dusty gloom like amber rods. Below, they revealed nothing but a thin haze. Above, the walking rings started so close to Liaisa's head that she could reach up and touch one. They stretched away in their thousands across the upturned acres of the cavern roof. Yet they were as nothing compared to the 88 major rings that clustered near the apex of the dome. From them, the dragons sense Liaisa's presence. Air swishes around the cavern as 88 pairs of wings unfold like a complicated puzzle. Great heads with multifaceted eyes peer down at her. The beasts are still faintly transparent. While the men around her take their hook boots from the rack, Liaisa bends her mind to the task of full visualization. Above her in the musty air, the dragons become fully visible. Bronze scales dully reflecting the sunbeam shafts. Now she too buckles on the hook boots and turns a graceful cartwheel to bring their hooks with a faint clang against a couple of the walking rings in the ceiling. Only now it is the floor. The world has changed. Now she is standing on the edge of a deep bowl or crater floored with the little rings, across which the dragon riders are already strolling with a pendulum gait. In the centre of the bowl, their huge mounts wait among the herd. Far above are the distant rocks of the cavern floor, discoloured by centuries of dragon droppings. Liaisa sets off towards her own dragon, Alaolith, who turns his great head towards her. She swings down the mounting ladder and lands with her legs locked around Alaolith's leathery neck. The dragon spreads his wings and drops. "They're gaining!" screamed Rincewind. He bent even lower over his horse's neck. Twoflower was trying to keep up, while at the same time craning to look at the flying beasts. "All my life I've wanted to see dragons!" he cried. From the inside, shouted Rincewind. Shut up and ride! Rincewind whipped his horse and stared at the wood ahead, trying to drag it closer by sheer willpower. He heard the clap of wings before shadows folded around him. He felt the white-hot stab of pain as something sharp scored a line across his shoulders. Behind him, Harun screamed. The barbarian had vaulted down into the heather and had drawn the black sword, Karing. "No bloody lizard does that to me!" he roared. Rincewind reached the shelter of the trees, where a low branch promptly knocked him out of the saddle. When he awoke, a dragon was hanging from a branch of a large oak tree several hundred feet away. Its bronze-gold wings were tightly wrapped around its body, but the long equine head
Europavei 134 Oslofjordtunnelen nå stengt I retning mot Drøbak, altså østover. Der står det en personbil og venter på bergingshjelp. Statens vegvesen opplyser at bergingsbilen ventet til Oslofjordtunnelen klokken 16:45. Vestover I retning mot Drammen går trafikken som normalt.
Its bronze-gold wings were tightly wrapped around its body, but the long equine head turned this way and that at the end of a remarkably prehensile neck. It was scanning the forest. It was also semi-transparent. Although the sun glinted off its scales, Rincewind could clearly make out the outlines of the branches behind it. On one of them, a man was sitting. He appeared to be naked, except for a pair of high boots, a leather holdall in the region of his groin, and a high-crested helmet. Rincewind wriggled sideways until foliage masked the oak and its occupants. Then he scrambled to his feet and haired off between the trees. When he'd put about a mile between him and the dragon, he stopped and collapsed against a tree, which then spoke to him. "Psst," it said. Dreading what he might see, Rincewind let his gaze slide upwards. It fixed on a black sword thrust straight through the branch above Rincewind's head. "Don't just stand there," said the sword. "Pull me out." "What?" said Rincewind. Pull me out, repeated Corinne. What happened to the others? Said Rincewind.
Oh, the dragons got them, and the horses, and that box thing. Me too, except that Helen dropped me. What a stroke of luck for you. I expect you'll be in a hurry to rescue them.
It added. Yes, well...
So, if you'll just pull me out, we can be off.
Rincewind scrambled up the tree and inched along the branch. Corinne was buried very firmly in the wood. He gripped the pommel and heaved until the blade slid free. Back on the ground, he decided to break the news. I really don't think rescue's a good idea, he said. I think we'd better head back to a city, to raise a search party.
The dragons headed hubwards, said Corinne. However, I suggest we start with the one in the trees over there.
Sorry, but
if you don't stop arguing, I'll chop your head off.
Rincewind saw his own arm snap up until the shimmering blade was humming a mere inch from his throat. He tried to force his fingers to let go. They wouldn't. Bronze Persephone rumbled deep in his throat. Cassedra, the dragon rider, leant forward and squinted across the clearing. I see him, he said. He swung himself down easily from branch to branch and landed lightly on the tussocky grass, drawing his sword. The approaching man was armed, but the dragon rider observed with some interest the strange way in which he held the sword in front of him at arm's length, as though embarrassed to be seen in its company. Later, Cassedra remembered only two things about the fight. He recalled the uncanny way in which the wizard's sword curved up and caught his own blade, with a shock that jerked it out of his grip. The other thing, and it was this he averred that led to his downfall, was that the wizard was covering his eyes with one hand. Cassedra jumped back to avoid another thrust and fell full length on the turf. With a snarl, Persephone unfolded his great wings and launched himself from his tree. A moment later, the wizard was standing over Cassedra, shouting, "Tell it that if it singes me, I'll let the sword go." The tip of the black sword was hovering over Cassedra's throat. "Persephone!" Cassedra shouted. The dragon pulled out of the dive that would have removed Rincewind's head and flapped ponderously back to the tree. "Talk!" screamed Rincewind. "What would you like me to say?" "Where are my friends?" "I expect they've been taken back to the Wurmberg." "Right then," said Rincewind as diffidently as he could manage. "You'd better take me to this Wurmberg of yours, hadn't you?" "Oh, all right," said Cassedra sulkily. He wriggled out from under the sword and waved at the dragon, which took wing again and glided in towards them. Rincewind looked at the dragon. He could quite clearly see through it to the crushed grass on which it lay, but when he gingerly touched a scale that was a mere golden sheen on thin air, it felt solid enough. "And no dragons could be seen through," he said. Cassedra shrugged. "Didn't you?" he said. He swung himself astride the dragon awkwardly. He swung himself astride the dragon awkwardly, because... He swung himself astride the dragon awkwardly, because Rincewind was hanging onto his belt. Once, uncomfortably aboard, the wizard moved his white knuckle grip to a convenient piece of harness and prodded Cassedra lightly with the sword. Persephone clawed its way into the air with a series of vertebrae-shattering bounds. At the top of its last leap, the wide wings unfolded with a snap and spread out with a thump which shook the trees. Then the ground was gone, dropping away in a series of gentle jerks. Persephone was suddenly rising gracefully, the afternoon sunlight gleaming off wings that were still no more than a golden film. Rincewind made the mistake of glancing downwards and found himself looking through the dragon to the treetops below. Far below. His stomach shrank at the sight. Cassedra half turned and shouted in his ear, "Behold, the Wurmberg!" Rincewind saw the impossibly inverted mountain rearing out of the deep forested valley like a trumpet in a tub of moss. Even at this distance, he could make out the faint octarine glow in the air. That must be indicating a stable magic aura of at least, he gasped, several milliprime, at least. Oh no, he said. He averted his eyes quickly and realized that he could now no longer see the ground through the dragon. As they glided around in a wide circle towards the Wurmberg, it was definitely taking on a more solid form, as if the creature's body was filling with a gold mist. By the time the Wurmberg was in front of them, the dragon was as real as a rock. The flared plateau of the upturned mountain drifted towards them. The dragon didn't even slow. Rincewind saw a cave mouth. The Sapphire skimmed towards it. There was a brief vision of rock flashing past, blurred by speed. Then the dragon was inside a cave, but bigger than any cave had a right to be. There were other dragons. Gold, silver, black, white, flapping across the sun-shafted air. High in the domed roof of the cavern, scores of others hung from huge rings, their wings wrapped bat-like around their bodies. There were men up there too. Rincewind swallowed hard when he saw them, because they were walking on that broad expanse of ceiling like flies. Then he made out the thousands of tiny rings that studded the ceiling. A number of inverted men were watching Persephone's flight with interest. Rincewind swallowed again. Well, he asked in a whisper, any suggestions?
Obviously, you attack,
said Corinne scornfully. Why didn't I think of that? Said Rincewind. Could it be because they all have crossbows? Before Corinne could reply, Persephone reared in midair and alighted on one of the large rings, which rocked alarmingly. Men were converging on the ring from all directions, walking with a swaying motion as their hooked boots engaged the ceiling rings. There were more boots on a rack that hung in a small platform built on the side of the perch-ring. Before Rincewind could stop him, the dragon rider had leapt from the creature's back to land on the platform, where he stood grinning at the wizard's discomfiture. There was a small expressive sound made by a number of crossbows being cocked. Surrender, said Cassandra. Rincewind opened his mouth to do so. Gring hummed a warning, and agonizing waves of pain shot up his arm. Never! He squeaked. The pain stopped. Of course he won't, boomed an expansive voice behind him. He's a hero, isn't he? Rincewind turned and looked into a pair of hairy nostrils. They belonged to a heavily built young man, hanging nonchalantly from the ceiling by his boots. What is your name, hero? Said the man. Agony shot up Rincewind's arm. I'm Rincewind Bank, he managed to gasp. And I am Leo Dragonlord, said the hanging man. You have come to challenge me in mortal combat. Well, no, I didn't. Cassandra, help our hero into a pair of boots. I'm sure he's anxious to get started. No, look, I just came here to find my friends. I'm sure there's no... Rincewind began, as the dragon rider guided him firmly onto the platform, pushed him onto a seat, and proceeded to strap hook boots to his feet. You will see your friends soon, said Dragonlord airily. Show him how to reach the rings, Cassandra.
Look what you've got me into,
Rincewind hissed. Ring vibrated in his hand.
Remember that I am a magic sword,
it hummed. Climb the ladder and grab a ring, said the dragon rider. Then bring your feet up until the hooks catch. He helped the protesting wizard climb until he was hanging upside down, robe tucked into his breeches, ring dangling from one hand. A dragon rider handed Leo a long shape wrapped in red silk. We fight to the death, he said. And I suppose I earn my freedom if I win, said Rincewind. Don't be naive. Rincewind took a deep breath. I suppose I should warn you that this is a magic sword. Leo let the red silk wrapping drop away into the gloom and flourished a jet black blade. What a coincidence, he said, and lunged. Rincewind went rigid with fright, but his arm swung out as Corinne shot forward. The swords met in an explosion of octarine light. Leoc swung himself backwards, his eyes narrowing. Corinne leapt past his guard, and although the Dragon Lord's sword jerked up to deflect most of the force, the result was a thin red line across its master's torso. With a growl, he launched himself at the wizard, boots clattering. The swords met again in another violent discharge of magic, and at the same time, Leoc brought his other hand down against Rincewind's head, jarring him so hard that one foot jerked out of its ring. A grinning Leoc swung back and brought his sword around in a lazy arc. Rincewind ducked. The blade hissed coldly through the air beside his head and entered the rock of the cavern roof without slowing. With that desperation only available to the really terrified, Rincewind uncoiled like a snake and launched himself across the space between them. He locked both hands around the Dragon Lord's sword arm and wrenched. It was at that moment that Rincewind's one remaining ring, already overburdened, slid out of the rock. He plunged down, swung wildly, and ended up dangling with his hands gripping the Dragon Lord's arm. "Let go, damn you!" Leoc screamed, "or we'll both die!" Rincewind said nothing. "Shoot him!" bellowed Leoc. Out of the corner of his eye, Rincewind saw several crossbows levelled at him. Leoc chose that moment to flail down with his free hand, and a fistful of rings stabbed into the wizard's fingers. He let go. Twoflower grabbed the bars and pulled himself up. "See anything?" said Hurun. "Just clouds." Hurun lifted him down again and sat on the edge of one of the wooden beds. "Bloody hell," he said. "Don't despair," said Twoflower. "I expect it's all some sort of misunderstanding. I expect they'll release us soon, and when we get back, we can say we've seen dragons. What about that, eh?" "Dragons don't exist," said Hurun flatly. "I don't know what we're seeing, but they aren't dragons." "But they carried us up in the air. In that hall there must have been hundreds." "I expect it was just magic," said Hurun dismissively. "Well, they look like dragons," said Twoflower, an air of defiance about him. "I always wanted to see dragons ever since I was a little lad. Dragons flying around in the sky, breathing flames." There was something wrong with these dragons. Too small and sleek compared to the ones in his mind's eye. Dragons ought to be big and green and clawed and exotic and fire-breathing. Big and green with long, sharp... "Hurun," he said. There was a snore from the other bunk. At that moment, the door was flung back. Half a dozen guards hurtled through it, crossbows at the ready. A woman strode into the room. No one can stride convincingly, but she managed it. She glanced briefly at the flower, as one might look at a piece of furniture, then glared down at the man on the bed. She drew a slim black dagger from her belt and stabbed downward. Before it was halfway through its arc, Hurun's right hand moved so fast that it appeared to travel between 2 points in space without at any time occupying the intervening air. It closed around the woman's wrist with a dull smack. His other hand groped feverishly for a sword that wasn't there. Hurun awoke. he said, looking up at the woman with a puzzled frown. Then he caught sight of the bowman. "Let go," said the woman. Hurun released his grip slowly. She stepped back, massaging her wrist. "So," she said at last, "you passed the first test. What is your name, barbarian?" "I am Hurun of Chimeria. And you?" "Eleazar Dragon Lady." "You are the lord of this place?" "That remains to be seen. You have the look about you of a hired sword, Hurun of Chimeria. I could use you, if you pass the tests, of course. There are 3 of them. You have passed the first." "What are the other—" Hurun paused. His lips moved soundlessly, and then he hazarded, "2 perils." "Excuse me," said Twoflower. "And if I fail these tests, said the room. If you had failed the first test, you would now be dead. This may be considered a temporary penalty. Look, began Tooflower. Liaisa spared him a brief glance. Take that away, she said. Two of the guards shouldered their bows, grasped Tooflower by the elbows, and lifted him off the ground. Then they trotted smartly through the doorway. They hurried down the corridor, stopped in front of another door, and dragged it open. Tooflower landed in a heap of what might once have been straw. The door banged shut, its echoes punctuated by the sound of bolts being slammed home. In the other cell, Ron and Ben linked. He said, "What is the second test?" "You must kill my two brothers." "Fighters, are they?" "No." "So, in return for this, you'll wed me to become Lord of the Willowmere." Tooflower sat on his straw and stared into the darkness. He wondered how long he'd been there. Hours at least. He tried to think of something else. Grass, trees, fresh air, dragons. Dragons. There was the faintest of scrabblings in the darkness. Tooflower fervently found himself wishing for a light. A gout of flame rolled past his head and struck the far wall. As the rocks flashed into furnace heat, he looked up at the dragon that now occupied more than half the cell. "I obey, Lord," said a voice in his head. By the glow of the crackling, spitting stone, Tooflower looked into his own reflection in two enormous green eyes. Beyond them, the dragon was as multi-hued, horned, spiked, and lithe as the one in his memory. A real dragon. Its folded wings were wide enough to scrape the wall on both sides of the room. It lay with him between its talons. "Play?" he said. "Of course, Lord." The glow faded away. Tooflower pointed a trembling finger at where he remembered the door to be and said, "Open it." The dragon raised its huge head. Again the ball of flame rolled out. The door fell in two pieces in the passage beyond. The flame winked out with a suddenness that was almost as startling as its arrival. Tooflower stepped gingerly over the cooling door